Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And that brings us to our special order of business item, SB 251, Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to present Senate Bill 251. I also want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and your staff, the committee staff, for working diligently with me to attempt to craft some solutions to a problem that is statewide and significant. I don't have to tell you, but 25 years ago, President Bush signed the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, probably the most sweeping civil rights legislation to be enacted since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The ADA recognized at the time that a majority of public facilities in this nation were simply inaccessible to the disabled, and the ADA sought to address that issue by generally requiring that access barriers be removed and the facilities be open, truly open to all. From the outset, frankly, some businesses were simply not interested in complying. But for those businesses that were, compliance was not easy. The ADA access standards were complicated and in some cases were contradictory. I suggest that if you were to ask a business owner in your districts, a business owner who has recently received a building permit from a building department in a city or county, if that business owner and that business were good to go from an ADA compliance standpoint, the business owner would say, "Sure am." And we know that the answer to that is simply wrong. Unfortunately, over the last 25 years, from my perspective, we've spent a lot of time fine-tuning the ADA enforcement process in this state and nationally, and not enough time educating and training business operators and providing certified ADA access specialists to ensure access for all, the purpose of the ADA. Now, this bill attempts to remedy that situation by focusing on education, training, and access to help. What does it do in its present form? It helps to increase the number of ADA access specialists and access to those specialists to help business. It requires local building departments to provide business permit applicants with information about ADA access requirements and requires that those permits be expedited when the business owner is attempting to fix ADA access issues. It provides a tax credit to small business to eliminate ADA access barriers, to try to incentivize businesses that are cash-strapped anyway to invest that cash in their facilities to allow access to all. The tax credit has a sunset, a 7-year sunset presently, to make sure that it truly accomplishes its objectives. The bill also, in its present form, allows small business a short period of time, 15 days, to fix signage and related issues. And finally, for those businesses who have spent the time to locate a certified access specialist and spent the money to hire that access specialist, it allows those businesses, in its present form, without regard to size, 90 days to fix the ADA access issues before litigation over statutory damages, minimum statutory damages, can begin. The bill does not restrict personal injury lawsuits and does not restrict actions for injunctive relief. We need to dramatically reform ADA compliance in this state with education and training and a fair opportunity correct. And from my perspective, I believe this bill is a good step in the right direction. I want to specifically thank my co-sponsors, the Consumer Attorneys of California and the California Chamber of Commerce, for working together with me diligently to try to craft a fair and adequate bill. Now, I'd like to address some of the committee amendments, if Mr. Chair, if I may take a few more minutes.
Sure.
Yesterday, the committee proposed amendments to the bill, including limiting what I will call the 90 or 120 day, I'd ask for an additional 30 days, opportunity to correct, limiting that only to small business being defined as businesses with 25 or fewer employees, annual gross revenue of $3.5 million or less, among other amendments. In response, I personally marked up the bill did a mock-up of the bill proposing some amendments back to the committee. And those included requiring the CASP to submit the inspection report to the business within 30 days, eliminating the 15-day opportunity to correct signage issues, reemphasizing that the retention of the CASP by the business and the CASP inspection must predate the claim or demand in order for the business to secure any opportunity to correct. 3, providing that the posting of the notice of the CASP inspection. And 4, further providing that a business would only be entitled to one CASP inspection, that was one of the issues, per facility, unless the business later secured a permit and completed a work of improvement which impacted accessibility. It seemed to me that if we were going to limit the CASP inspection to one time, one facility, if the business did something that changed the playing field, that the business should have an opportunity to re-engage the CASP in that event. Last night, and you can tell the chair and his committee staff have been working diligently late at night on these issues, and I am much appreciative of that. Last night I received some additional amendments, and unfortunately some of those I'm simply not able to accept. 1, the opportunity to correct is still limited to small business, 25 employees or fewer. So, for example, if you're a McDonald's franchisee and you have 6 stores, none of the stores have more than 20 employees, but in the aggregate have more than 25 employees, you would theoretically be precluded from exercising the opportunity to correct after having secured and hired a CASP and obtained a CASP inspection. 2, as a condition of receiving relief from the minimum statutory damage under the provisions as proposed, a business must correct all violations at the facility, not just those noted in the CASP inspection report. So, for example, if you hire a CASP and you spend the money necessary to do so and you take the time to facilitate the CASP inspection and the CASP inspector provides you with a written report and it lists 10 violations that need to be corrected and you correct all 10, if someone then visits your facility and there is an 11th violation that's not in the report that you have not corrected, under the current language, you lose the opportunity to secure the benefit of eliminating the minimum statutory damages in any litigation. 3rd, if the business fails to, under the language proposed, as the way I read it, if the business fails to correct all violations within the 90 or the 120-day period, whichever winds up in the bill, even when the business is trying, such as you can't get your permit expedited fast enough, you can't get a contractor out to the business to fix it fast enough, and you blow by the 90 days or the 120 days, as I read it, the business later loses the opportunity to correct within 60 days of service of a complaint in exchange for the reduced minimum statutory damages, the $1,000, under the Steinberg-Dutton SB 1186 bill. 4, the business is still limited to one CASP inspection per facility. From my perspective, unfortunately, this does not take into account the fact that the business, as I said, may later pull a permit and accomplish a work of improvement. But moreover, it doesn't take into account the fact that you may have both a landlord and a tenant responsible for the same facility who have allocated responsibility for different portions of the facility, who frankly should be entitled to each have a CASP inspection, such as a landlord who takes responsibility for the parking lot and the tenant takes responsibility for the structure in the inside of the building. Both areas could very well have access issues that need to be addressed. Both areas could very well have a need to have a CASP inspection report, and then be charged with fixing the issues in the CASP inspection report. And finally, number 5, the amendments as I read them continue to require that this bill be double jointed with AB 1521 for enactment purposes, a bill that I just received and haven't had the opportunity to review. But frankly, it's a provision from my understanding that Senate leadership is simply unwilling to accept. So for those reasons, I do thank you for the opportunity to present. I clearly appreciate the work, Mr. Chair, that you have done with respect to this bill, and the effort that your staff has put forward repeatedly to draft and propose amendments, most recently yesterday. I know this is a difficult bill, both for you, Mr. Chair, and for those of you on the committee. I thank you for your patience, for the opportunity to present. I respectfully ask for an aye vote, and in the event that this bill does not pass out of committee, I respectfully request reconsideration. Thank you for your time, sir.
So, Senator, just to be clear, because there were a number of amendments that were offered that were worked out with a lot of the stakeholders, and as we were working through this yesterday afternoon, it would have been helpful if we had access to you and to your staff to work through a number of the issues that were raised by them, because I think there's a great deal of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and a great deal of willingness to work through some of the issues that you had brought up. At this point in time, the amendments that we're offering had been vetted through, as I said, a wide range of stakeholders. To not take them at this point certainly jeopardizes the bill and jeopardizes the work that everyone has put into this. I think there certainly are other opportunities to move the policy as it's been created forward. But what the effort was to reduce as much of any opposition or concerns that had been raised in the bill, come up with processes, I do agree complicated, but still processes that protect the businesses, that respect the fact that there are violations of the law, and what the ultimate goal is to get the violations corrected, give all people of California access to facilities that they had wanted to do. So just for clarity, you're here pitching the bill as it came into committee and not accepting the amendments that the committee has proposed.
Well, Mr. Chair, the 5 issues that I've outlined, the limitation to small business, the issues having to do with the business being charged with all violations, not simply those noted in the report in terms of correcting, the issues having to do with the interference with the benefits afforded by the Steinberg-Dutton SB 1186, the issue having to do with the one inspection per facility and how that needs to be clarified, and the double jointing are the issues in the amendments that I am simply unable to accept. There are other provisions in the amendments that I have not referenced, and I did not reference them for a reason. That I can work with those. But those issues that I've just mentioned, and in particular the small business limitation, that was an issue that I think that if a business, regardless of size, now if someone has a thing about big box retailers and wants to set a cap of 500 or more employees or 350 or more employees, I'm okay with that. But I think the issue that an employer or manufacturer with 95 employees or 100 employees or even 65 employees, if they take the time and have the interest to find a CASP, which currently in California is somewhat difficult to do, this bill fixes that. If they take the time and dig into their wallet and pull out the dollar bills necessary to hire a CASP, which is not cheap currently in California, and if they take the time to facilitate the CASP inspection of the facility, and make an attempt to correct, I think they ought to get the benefit of the 90 days or 120 days from date of inspection to fix the problems, free from assessment of minimum statutory damages, and not be limited just because they have 26 employees or 27 employees. So I understand the effort. I respect the process. I understand the potential outcome. I appreciate what you're attempting to do, and I thank you.
Well, and for the record, in conversations last night with the stakeholders, the issue of small businesses is something I'm absolutely willing to work on. That's not a limit, because I do not disagree with you that we would end up with any disparate outcome by having a conversation about who it's going to apply to. Conjoining it to the other bill is something I'm absolutely willing to talk about. But if you don't raise those with me, if we don't have the conversation, then it's difficult to know really where to go. And we've ended up with a choice, a bill with amendments that we've tried to put in a lot of benefit to. Your unwillingness to take those amendments, and I'm just concerned about where we are.
Mr. Chair, I don't know how I do that. Do I commit to amending a bill to restrict the benefit to small business that statutorily defined in this bill certainly as 25 employees or less, and then what happens and where does it go, and have I now agreed that that's the amount in the bill? It's hard to deal with amendments that are fluid. I'm pleased that you're willing to do that, but I just don't know how I do that here. And I understand the difficulty that this puts you in and your staff in. I'm willing to accept the outcome. I've requested reconsideration, and I guess we can see how this all turns out. But I don't know what I'm committing to. I can't commit to what's in the current version in the areas that I've referenced. I don't know what the changes are so that I can commit with certainty that they're okay. Obviously, this committee decides what moves out, and I respect that process more than you know.
All right. Well, thank you, Senator. Do you have witnesses in support?
Mr. Chair and members, Chris McKaylee on behalf of the Civil Justice Association of California. We have long sought efforts to limit what we consider to be abusive lawsuits under the ADA. We think that Senator Ross' bill ought to move as is. His measure was substantially amended in 2 Senate policy committees over the last few months and has been watered down substantially. It did pass 40-0 out of the Senate, but we would encourage its adoption as is. We have been involved in the prior efforts, and the reason why we keep finding ourselves here, and I think between this House and the other, there's more than half a dozen bills, unfortunately a number of them not moving to reform the ADA litigation process, is because we keep ending up with substantially watered down bills. We had a big reform effort with the Corbett bill and continued to see abusive litigation. We saw a big reform effort in SB 1186, the Steinberg-Dutton bill, and of course a few years later find ourselves right back in the same situation because in reality the abusive suits are not being addressed. So we would like to see Senator Ross' bill move as is. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support?
Yolanda Benson, representing the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce. We would like to see the bill move as is. Actually, many of our businesses are small businesses, but most of them are more than 25 employees. So that change would be very harmful to the API businesses in California, and we would like to see it as is. As a stakeholder, I was aware of these amendments just as of yesterday, so I was unable to opine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred Main on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce Alliance of Ventura and Santa Barbara counties in support of the bill.
Mr. Chair and members, Matthew Harg with the California Business Properties Association. Up until this latest round of amendments, we were very supportive of the bill. At this point, we would defer to the Senator's judgment on how to move forward with the bill, but are supportive of the concept and are supportive of the bill moving forward as is. Thank you.
Nicole Rice, California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and we too are supportive of the bill as is, and we would urge the committee to consider and move the bill as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, Julianne Broyles here for both the Associated Builders and Contractors of California and the Family Business Association of California. We also would prefer the bill to move forward as it is. Ask for your support.
I'm sorry. Yolanda Benson on behalf of the National Federation of Independent Business as well, in support of the bill as is.
Thank you. Anyone else in support? Is there any opposition?
May I come up?
Yes, please.
Are you on the panel? Are you on the panel? No. Okay. Yeah, everyone's going to be lining up right here.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Richard Scaff. I'm here today representing Designing Accessible Communities. It's a 504c3 nonprofit organization in the state of California. I am also here as a retired chief building inspector and ADA coordinator and deputy director of 3 different programs within the city of San Francisco that I created under 5 mayors. I have that experience, and many other years I started the Marin Center for Independent Living in Marin County. I am here today to oppose this bill. In my point of view, both the bill itself and any of the amendments, which, by the way, I have never seen in writing. I have been told, given a sort of a general idea of what the proposed amendments are, but I have not seen them, which I'm very concerned about. This is a right to cure bill that directly threatens the rights of people with disabilities. If this bill passes, we will be, in California, the only population group that is affected, that has our civil rights affected by violations in the built environment, that will not have the same level of ability to remedy those violations. As I said when I first introduced myself, I've been a building official. I was a senior chief building inspector for the city of San Francisco, specifically in 1989, to help the department assure that it would comply with California Building Code. And it wasn't at the time. It was the first city in the country to have a pattern and practice lawsuit against it by a public interest law firm for not enforcing California Title 24, the building code portion for access. One of the major aspects of this bill is a list of items. I believe they're parking, signage, and there's a third one, and I can't think of the third one. Truncated domes. First of all, I don't know how those three were chosen, and it was determined that they were minor violations. When we're talking about truncated domes, for example, I don't know whether any of you understand why truncated domes are used, but they're used to warn people with limited vision or no vision that they are going into a vehicle way. I'm sorry. That they are going into a vehicle way, or they're going to step off a transit platform. And we've had people that are blind killed because they did not have those type of warning materials. So that's the first part of that. The other part of this is, if you were to decide to adopt this bill today with those three items in it, what's to say that next year this gentleman doesn't come back and say, there are three other items I want to add, or maybe 4 or 5 items I want to add. We are starting the slippery slope, ladies and gentlemen, where our rights are being very carefully, very gently, little by little, being removed. They're happening at the state architect's office, too, in the way they're developing building code. Instead of this bill, and I spoke about this when SB 1186 was being discussed in the legislature, why isn't the state legislature looking at ways to assure that we have better compliance? Not to deal with it at the back end, where our only way, because we can't go to a building department, and I have pictures here to show you, if I might. I hate to ask you, sir, would you mind passing these up? Sure. One of the people that's here today, Holin DeLille.
Give those to the sergeant, please.
One of the people that's here today, Holin DeLille, the lady in the white jacket, and I went out to dinner Sunday night before the fireworks up in Guerneville, California, in the Russian River area. And we had a very nice dinner in a somewhat accessible restaurant. And afterwards, I said, there's a brand new ice cream store in Guerneville. It was an old historic bank, not registered historic, but historic bank building that's been modified and turned into an ice cream parlor. How wonderful. I hadn't been in there as yet. Those pictures you're going to be looking at, and I'm sorry they aren't the greatest of quality. That building was just approved by the Sonoma County Building Department. They had a building permit, and they had an occupancy because it was a bank previously. So they had to get a brand new occupancy permit because it was a change of occupancy. It was going from a bank to a retail. If you look at the photographs carefully, you will see that there are 3 new doors, brand new doors, in the interior of the building that were installed in this remodel, non-complying hardware with a pinch lock that people that are quadriplegics could not operate. There are 2 customer seating positions. Neither one, by code, is accessible. They're supposed to be, by code. And there's a sign as you enter the building that's been attached to the exterior wall that says, this is an unreinforced masonry building that has not been seismically retrofitted, if you go into this building, you take your chances. It's your responsibility. That's the kind of enforcement we're getting. So if we are trying to, and I believe there's sincerity in the effort that is being made by some legislators in creating legislation to solve these problems, but we're going at it the wrong way. We're going at it at the back end instead of at the front end, which is where licensed architects, licensed engineers, licensed contractors, and the local building departments that are not licensed are not doing their job, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute disgrace, and nobody's holding them responsible. And now what has happened, we have a whole, I will stop in just 1 second. I apologize. We now have a new level of bureaucracy, the CAS program. It took 3 years of harassing my friend Dennis Corellis at the State Architect's Office to get them to hire somebody to start overseeing the CAS program, because nobody was doing anything to assure that the certified access specialists were doing what they were supposed to do. I've turned in about a dozen, maybe a few more, and I just got one from Palm Drive Hospital in Sebastopol, California. The CAS program is a failure. It is not overseen. I have been now told I have no ability to give the state architect a report from a CASP that I've received and be able to have that CASP report audited, because I am not the building owner or business owner that hired the person. So there's one other place I have no control over.
Thank you, sir. I do need you to wrap up.
I'm sorry?
I do need you to wrap up.
I will. We have CASP reports that are stating, I'm sorry, this item, and this item are not readily achievable. The readily achievable requirement in the ADA and California requirements is based on financial capability of a business to make those modifications. I don't know one certified access specialist that is an auditor, a financial auditor that goes in and does an audit of the business. They have no way of telling whether that business is capable financially of paying to correct those violations that they say are not readily achievable. And yet there is no audit of those reports by the state architect to solve that. The only one thing I want to say about this, and I'll stop, is that there is one positive part of this bill that I do support, and I hope we can get to it some other way, and that is the $10,000 a year tax credit for doing correction, similar to the $15,000 federal tax credit for doing modifications to bring a building into compliance. But why I've been doing this for almost 40 years, why after 40 years are we seeing the level of violations throughout the state? This isn't a disability lawsuit problem. This is a structural problem within the design, construction, and permitting community, and that's what needs to change. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Kevin Baker for the American Civil Liberties Union of California. It has been my privilege, I would say, to have worked on this issue for the last 15 years, each of the bills that the legislature has considered. And I have great appreciation for how complicated it is. And yet there have been, in each instance, a coalition of people of goodwill who see the issue from different sides, but who have come together and reached compromise in this area on each of these efforts. And that's on both the disability rights side and on the business side. I'm confident that that can continue. This is a very complicated area, but it is appropriate that we proceed with caution and with care. I don't think it's coincidental that the civil rights movement began with fights over the lunch counters in Selma and the buses in Birmingham, all the way to the bars of Stonewall. These places of public accommodation are central to the lives we live, and equality in this sphere is very important. So I appreciate the sensitivity with which the committee has pursued this delicate issue, both because of the sort of the very fundamental nature of it and also the great complexity of the law in this area. We had great problems with the bill as it was proposed. We would be neutral with the bill as the committee attempted to improve it. I'm happy to go into more detail. I don't want to belabor the point now. I will just say, for the purposes of, noting now that with respect to the definition of small business that was proposed by the committee, it is exactly the same as the definition of small business that is currently in the bill that was negotiated in a bipartisan fashion among all stakeholders in SB 1186 with Senator Steinberg and Senator Dutton. And I think it is therefore appropriate. As I say, I can go into more detail on all the technical points, but I will leave it at that for the time being.